Hello and welcome to NewsClick. In today's episode of Talking Science at Tech, we are joined by Prabir Prakayastha to discuss how the current landscape of the COVID-19 vaccine is looking. So, as we know, the Pfizer vaccine has now become the first one to be approved. It has been approved by the UK and it is set to roll out soon. So, Prabir, can you first start by telling us a bit about this vaccine and the other vaccine candidates which are there, which right now look the most promising?
Okay, if we look at what the vaccines which are already showing some signs of having proven successful, all of this with lots of caveats because they're early days yet, they're preliminary results, they're not findings which have been submitted to a peer-reviewed group, but they're really press releases. So what we are banking ourselves on are these press releases of the manufacturers. And secondly, these numbers on the basis of which these figures are being quoted are also not very large. So as the trials unfold, as more figures come in, we will be in a better position to see really what the efficacy levels are. So 4 vaccines have given their preliminary findings. One is, of course, the much touted BioNTech Pfizer vaccine. It is a BioNTech development which Pfizer is front-ending because it has the financial clout to do so. BioNTech is a German company. Pfizer is an American multinational. One of the bigger ones in terms of revenue. Then we have the Moderna vaccine, which has never successfully brought a vaccine to the market as yet, but using a new technology, which also is a BioNTech path, also a new technology, which is what is called the messenger RNA-based vaccines. And they also have claimed over 90% success. I'm not going to say 94, 92, 95. These are all on such small numbers, those figures don't make much sense. And then we have the Gamaleya vaccine, who have also, based on, again, small numbers, shown that they have above 90% efficacy. Now, efficacy is, the issue is that when you have a number of people you have put in the vaccine trials, then you look at over a period of time, the 2 arms, one the placebo arm and one is actually the virus arm, in which we have given some kind of either inactivated virus, some messenger RNA, which produces antibodies, produces actually virus components, which then produce the antibodies. All of this, if we take into account, then what you see is that the ratio of the people who get infected later in the placebo arm against the people who are in the vaccine arm, if there is a significant difference, those are the figures we are talking about, and therefore 95%, 90% really refer to that. Then we have the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, which has said 70% in one arm of the trial. It was 90%, other arm was 62%. And then they've averaged based on the numbers of people in each of the trials, and they've got a figure of 70%. Now, as we know, the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, this was a mistake. This arm which showed 90% actually had the first dose, which was half dose, and that was a mistake. And later on, therefore, they separated it and made it 2 trials. And interestingly enough, the one which had the mistake was found to be more successful. Again, small numbers. So if we have larger numbers, maybe they'll average it out and we'll see almost similar figures. So we have to wait and watch that. And you have the Gamaleya vaccine as well, as we said, that also has claimed a good success. So we have 4 vaccines on the table, and 2 of them have already received emergency usage clearance. One of it by UK, probably the US and the European Union authorities will also follow. And the Gamaleya vaccines by the Russians, who have also had an emergency usage policy for some time now, and they got that earlier. And then we have the Chinese vaccines also, which are in late trials, again on phase 3 trials, and the preliminary results should be out very soon. They have also permitted emergency usage, particularly for those who are going on peacekeeping operations outside the country. So they are essentially not a part of the double-blind trial, but they're a part of also the larger experiment of vaccinating people and seeing whether they get COVID-19 or not. So this is roughly the scenario. Now, there are a good number of vaccines now on phase 3 trials. So it's not, these are the only ones. And some of them are in fairly advanced form, like the Chinese, couple of the Chinese vaccines. So we expect every week now, or every 2 weeks, we will probably start seeing more results of the vaccines under phase 3 trials. And then there is another lot of 25, 30 vaccines, which are in the phase 1, phase 2 trials, which will also then graduate into the phase 3 trials, at least some of them. So we are likely to see about maybe 10, 12 vaccines make the cut. And because there are a large number of countries, because a lot of the countries are not going to depend on external suppliers, so countries like the US, like European Union, like UK, like India, as well as like Russia and China, they are going to produce their own vaccines. This is clear. They're not going to depend on others. Indian case, though we have vaccines which are also under trials, but we also have access because we have very large vaccine manufacturing capacity. So we are also licensing Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, Novavax vaccine, which is not yet in phase 3 trials in the United States, or at least the results are not out. So we have more access to this. And also we have Indian companies who've tied up with Russian vaccine manufacturers. If we take the whole scenario, yes, we are likely to see vaccines, but the picture is not that good when we try and see who is going to get access to these vaccines, which countries are well placed to get access or are already blocking the vaccines, and which countries are not. So what we see, a good picture scientifically. This is the fastest vaccine development ever. And we've also seen a very large number of companies, laboratories, who have worked together to develop a number of vaccines. So the science and the technology part of it, the production technology is still on hold, in the sense that we'll find out how that is going to go. That is, it seems, has passed the COVID-19 test. Whether we will pass the equity test, the public health test, and the challenge of delivering the vaccine to the people, this is what we have to see now. And as I said, with vaccine nationalism running amok, we really have a scenario which is very much skewed against poorer countries and the global poor.
Yes, so as you're saying that countries are basically, we see that of all these leading candidates, most of their doses have been bought up by, or they've already been booked by a few rich countries, which is just for about, I think, 13% of the world's population. And the lower income countries and middle income countries are being left behind. So then, when do you think is the vaccine going to reach the people in these countries?
If we look, let's look at quickly about how these countries which are grabbing the bulk of the lion's share of the vaccines, who are they? So rich countries with 13% of the world's population, and that's basically the United States, the United Kingdom, the European Union, Japan, Australia, Canada. This is really a handful of countries. And as I said, they represent only 13% of the world's population, have at the moment, out of the possible total production capacity, which is going to be there in 2021, they probably have more than 50%, probably close to 55 to 60% of the vaccine production, either bought or blocked. So this is the status that is there. So rest 30, 45, 40% is going to be divvied up with the 87% of the population. So that is the scale of the mismatch. In this, countries like India and Brazil, which have indigenous vaccine manufacturing capacity, are certainly better placed, particularly India, because you're the largest generic vaccine manufacturer in the world. In fact, the largest vaccine manufacturer in the world in Serum Institute, Pune. So India is in that sense luckier than others. And also we have Zydus Cadila, we have Reddy's Laboratory, we have Bharat Biotech, we have also other biologic manufacturers who can manufacture vaccines as well. So there are a number of contracts being reached among the vaccine developers and the vaccine manufacturers who have facilities in India. So this makes India better placed. So it is true that India probably has some ability to leverage a large amount of vaccines for itself, not on the scale which the rich countries have. Canada, I think, has 5 times the number of vaccines it requires for vaccinating its people. So while we don't have that amount of extra vaccines, but probably we'll be able to vaccinate a large number of the population. We have to see what the total numbers are. There are figures hanging around like 1.6 billion have been blocked by India. We don't know the veracity of these figures, but it is true that Serum Institute, which is planning to manufacture 2 billion vaccine doses, 1 billion of AstraZeneca, Oxford vaccine, and other is Novavax of the United States, that at least a part of that, maybe 50% of that, may be reserved for India. So that's the Indian advantage. But as I said, we have other manufacturers too. And Gamaleya has also reached some agreement with manufacturers to have 300 million vaccines produced in India. How much for India, we don't know. And Reddy's Laboratory is importing 100 million from them. So these are all the figures in India has. But when it comes to the poorer countries, those who have been economically poorer countries, they seem to be completely left out in the cold. Their only hope is what is called the COVAX platform, which has been set up by various vaccine alliances, in which WHO is also participating. There are about 100 odd countries who are participating. What is not happening is the money they require. If you want to supply the vaccine to the poorer countries, and COVAX facility, that's the one we are talking about, is only supplying 20% of the population's vaccines in the what would be called the LDCs, least developed countries. And also, if other countries want to participate, they will also get vaccines, but at cost. So this amount that they require for vaccinating the poorer countries or the least developed economies, that is just to do 20% of that, the amount they require is 2 billion. What they've got is only 800 billion till date. So they are really in no position to provide vaccines, therefore, to bulk of the least developed countries. Now, the least developed countries are also having agreements, for instance, with Chinese manufacturers and with Russian manufacturers, that in lieu of running vaccine trials in their countries, that they should get access to the vaccines, particularly for the Chinese, because having crushed the virus in their country, they don't have patience now for clinical trials. They need to go outside and do the clinical trials. They're doing some in Bangladesh, some in Brazil, in spite of the opposition of President Bolsonaro there. Then they're doing it in West Asia. So they're doing a large number of drug trials abroad. And in lieu of that, they have promised them vaccine supplies. China has also agreed to participate in the COVAX facility of WHO, Gavi, CEPI, the Vaccine Alliance. What they will do, will it be through supplies, will it be through money? We don't know. So at the moment, the chances of anything beyond a small section of the people in the global south, the poorest countries, the least economically developed countries, that is unlikely.
And related to this is, of course, the aspect of intellectual property rights, how those have been a barrier throughout this pandemic in terms of distribution of sufficient amount of medicines and other sorts of equipments. Other countries have not been able to get these because of these intellectual property rights. So when throughout this pandemic we see that the people are not being given access because of this. So we can probably expect something similar to happen in case of the vaccine as well.
Well, let's look at this issue slightly differently. One is the patent protected drugs, which were supposed to provide some efficacy, remdesivir being the main one touted. There were also some of the biologics which were talked about, which are anti-arthritic drugs, which they thought they could repurpose. All of them really failed, or the interferon, for instance, all of them really failed. They did not show significant efficacy, not at least in the most serious cases, or those who are under oxygen support. It seems it only helps during the early phases, and at that time people do not get access to this kind of drugs very easily. So what happened therefore is that the only drugs which really worked was the dexamethasone, corticosteroids, and that's being provided, and because it's a very cheap drug, so that's been provided, and unfortunately that has not reached the issue of patents or any of this kind of problems that we are talking about. What has happened is the patent works, for instance, even now, and even if it is not patents, it's basically other forms of intellectual property, which could be what are called trade secrets. There could be designs. There's a whole bunch of intellectual property protection, which is not patent protection. And those come in the way for diagnostics, for instance. We have the tests that are being done, PCRA tests, RT-PCR tests. So a lot of the diagnostics, which are not, the main technology may not be patent protected, but diagnostic, other aids, reagents, a lot of those things can come under different kinds of intellectual property regime. And when it comes to vaccines, the issue is even more. The issue is that it is not the patent that protects the vaccine alone, but the fact, how do you manufacture it? The manufacturing technology, if it's a closely guarded secret, or it is something which is put as a trade secret. So those kind of things then become a barrier. So there has been an application that all of these intellectual property, and there's a list of them which India and South Africa have moved the TRIPS Council on WTO, that these should be made free from intellectual property restrictions and should be widely shared. You see, the issue is not the legal part alone, but companies who hold these technologies must be willing to share them with countries, because it's a pandemic and they owe it to the world that they should, in this juncture, not think of profits, recovering their costs yet, but not profits. And that should be the approach. Unfortunately, when it comes to a Pfizer or it comes to a Moderna, they're very clear. They said we have nothing to do with anything else except for profit purpose, which we have built these vaccines for. So it's to make profits. Yes, we've got public funds, but our idea is that we should also provide enough money for our investors. So investors become the major driving force why they're doing or selling the vaccines. So this is the for-profit motive of big capital in pharmaceuticals. That is the one which prevents manufacturing being distributed across the globe. Otherwise, vaccine manufacture, if the basic technology is shared, is not that such a difficult exercise. In fact, China has a huge number of small enterprises who make vaccines. Unlike India, which you have a few big vaccine manufacturers, they have actually small and medium scale industries which make a very large amount of vaccines. So it is possible to scale down or scale up the vaccine manufacturing technology, provided that is shared and that is available widely. So that is where the problem comes. AstraZeneca, Oxford vaccine seems to have accepted that at least in this period of the epidemic, they won't make super profits. This is, after all, developed with public money, Oxford University. And therefore, this will be at least tried to be sold not at cost, but at minimal profit. So there is that approach that they are showing. But what the other companies will do, we don't know.
Thank you, Prabir, for talking to us today on this issue. That's all the time we have. Keep watching this clip.